Hello again, you're listening to the Blockchain Socialist Podcast, and for today's interview I have Dr. Hannes Gerhardt, who is a professor of human geography at the University of West Georgia. He has published on a wide range of political and economic issues and is currently working on a book exploring pathways to establishing non-capitalist forms of economic production. So hi, Dr. Gerhardt, how you doing?
Good, thanks for having me.
So I came across your work when I read your article, which was in Roar magazine, titled Blockchains, Building Blocks of a Post-Capitalist Future, which I thought was really interesting and has it explores a lot of really interesting spaces that are happening in blockchain and that has a lot of potential. But of course, we'll talk more about that in a bit. But maybe before we get into the article, I would be really interested to know, why did you get interested in blockchain from your own personal research interests? And from that perspective, so from a human geography perspective, what is interesting about blockchain?
Well, I'm been increasingly focusing in my research on alternatives for how we can organize our economy, so alternatives to the capital mode of production, with a heavy emphasis on the commons. And so I found blockchain to be an interesting tool because it allows you to really keep track of a large amount of information in a secure and decentralized way. And by doing that, it opens up a number of possibilities. One is it allows you to structure economic environments in an intentional way. So if we are trying to start taking certain things into account in production, these need to be tracked and verified, and blockchain can be very helpful there. Blockchain is also very interesting in its potential with regard to enabling democracy, an expansion of decision-making, decentralized decision-making. And lastly, of course, with regards to currencies, alternative currencies, blockchain-based alternative currencies offer a way to generate capital and incentivize certain types of behavior. And of course, in the longer term, the idea is that these alternative cryptocurrencies could even be an alternative to state-based money. Meaning that the creation of money and then consequently who has access to it could be organized in ways that's fundamentally different from the current system.
So I guess that means that you see a lot of potential for, of course, non-capitalist forms of economic production, but maybe to preface it, how would you define a non-capitalist form of economic production, and what are some maybe examples of that? Does something like that exist today in a world where we would consider our dominant mode of production to be capitalism?
I think that there's lots of non-capitalist production going on. I would consider basically anything, any type of activity that adds value to the world that is not primarily driven by profit as being non-capitalist production or non-capitalist activity. And so this could be household work, it can be community-oriented work, it could be work, on a larger scale for the greater good of humanity. And so this can happen within the family. It can happen when, people are contributing to the commons or for the social, environmental well-being. And it happens, on individual bases. You can be working for a nonprofit or in loose collaborative organizations, cooperatives. And so I think that there are lots of opportunities for non-capitalist production that are happening already, but that can be expanded. This doesn't mean that these are beyond the reach of capital, or that capital doesn't continuously try and oftentimes succeed in co-opting these forms of non-capitalist production. But I think that doesn't necessarily make them capitalists. I see them as outside. of capitalism, but constantly interacting with capitalism.
Is there any like very clear example that because what I've heard is that something like Wikipedia, would that be considered a non-capitalist form of economic production?
Yeah, I mean, Wikipedia is it certainly fits the bill. I guess I was just trying to make it even larger, um, because a lot of times, particularly within anarchist types of literature, they emphasize that this non-capitalist type of these non-capitalist social relations and non-capitalist production is really all around us. I mean, just having your friends over for dinner is a very non-capitalist thing to do, and so. So I was trying to.
You don't charge your friends for the dinner, but you cook them every time.
We're not there yet. So that's a good thing. But yes, I mean, when you're talking about certain types of activities that more fit into particular economic sectors where you would expect maybe a for capitalist type of entity to dominate, and then you find something like Wikipedia. That is a very good example of a non-capitalist type of production. It's collaborative. People are voluntarily putting that information in, and it's not for profit.
All right. So we have our definition of what a non-capitalist economic production looks like. But so I'm curious then, what are your thoughts on the current state of blockchain and cryptocurrency? And because I think it's easy to criticize it. So I'm curious. What do you think are the bad parts of it? But what are some of the post-capitalist elements that are the most interesting or eye-catching to you of blockchain in the moment?
Well, I guess I could start with the bad. In some ways, any technology, especially emerging technology that has a lot of potential still, is something that will catch the interest of capital. Capital will always seek to make the most of anything new, and so the same thing is happening with blockchain. And so I guess what I'm concerned about is that blockchain will be used to make capitalism even more effective, I guess, and in terms of dominating the economic sphere. And so it's maybe a bit counterintuitive, but the banking industry is flocking towards blockchain, even though blockchain is oftentimes presented as something that can cut out the central middleman of the banks. But I think the banks are onto that, right? So they're figuring out that if this is the next wave, they're going to have to be a part of it, So similar to what happened with file sharing and what happened to the music industry, if you did not get on board with the digitization of music, then you were going to be left behind, right? So the Spotifys and these pay for service types of capitalist enterprises, they then came and essentially replaced the record industry. The banks see the writing on the wall, and so they're responding, and so they're working to now co-opt this danger into a profit-making opportunity. Another thing that concerns me is when you start using blockchains in these smart contracts. The concern there is that you really enable this potential for charging basically for everything, right? You then have this possibility where your entire life can become this series of mini charges, basically, right? And so whether you're making use of state or private services, every little time you make access to that service, that you can be charged for it. And these could even be made, on the basis of supply and demand. So it's kind of like the data plans you get with your phone. You can either have unlimited access or you would have a certain amount of allotment, but this could essentially be applied to everything that you use. And that's concerning, because then you really get away from this idea of a commons or a public, and of us all contributing to something that's a common good, and everything essentially there's a charge to it, and that's really capitalism taking over everything. So blockchain has the potential of enabling that, and so there's a concern with that.
It's sort of financialization, I mean, which is already, I mean, arguably to an extreme at the moment, but taking it even farther, there's a potential with, I think, any sort of digitization of information. Basically, banks and the financial industry seems to want to find a way to financialize it, and ironically, blockchain and cryptocurrencies trying to be the anti-bank technology is sort of seeming like it's ending up being the bankification of our economic lives sometimes, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, and that's that's that insidious way that capitalism has of finding a way to constantly put these new technologies to a use that that maybe we hadn't anticipated, but that ultimately just furthers their bottom line. And so, that's it's inevitable that capital will try to do this, and that they will pursue this, and they'll have a lot of power behind it. But it doesn't mean that that it's inevitable either.
Right.
And that there are alternatives in terms of the direction that that blockchain could go, or how it could be applied.
Would you consider similar to how the file sharing technology that happened back in 90s 2000s and blockchain now, like, would you consider them to be terrains of, I guess in a way, political struggle in a sense, where I think in the file sharing example or music streaming, I mean, essentially capitalism won with Spotify. I mean, Napster, peer-to-peer file sharing services for music as a dominant form of production, it seems to be on the is not dominating capitalism's Spotify's and these other type of streaming services. Whereas I feel like my view seems to be that we're with blockchain at a similar point where we're in the middle of the political struggle. Would you see it that way, or would you see it differently?
I suppose I share that view. I would say there may be a difference in that the file sharing um, that was enabled with the explosion of the internet was something that came about, I think, quite suddenly, and caught capital really off guard. And capital really had to struggle to find a solution to that. And you can say that capital won in that they have these platforms now where they control access, but at the same time, I mean, I can have basically access to all the music in the world, for a pretty nominal fee.
Mm.
And when I was growing up, the amount that it costs to pay for all the music in the entire world, that would maybe be enough to buy one album.
Yeah.
So in a way, the digitization of information, in this case of music, really it just exploded access to content that capital has found ways of still profiting off of, but not nearly in the way that they used to be able to do it.
And so then, with blockchain, what are the bright spots that you see in it?
Well, I guess the flip side is that as capital is trying to make the most of it for profit, there's also the alternative of using blockchain in intentional ways to pursue nonprofit ideals. And so there's a number of things to point to, I guess. In terms of concrete examples, I've found these open value networks very interesting. The company, I guess they call themselves a company. It's not really a company. It's a strange kind of entity. They call themselves an open value network. It's called Sensorica. They engage in projects that focus on building sensing types of equipment. And so in that sense, they're a manufacturing entity. But the way that they organize themselves is that anybody can take part. And so anybody can join a project, anybody can start a project, anybody can contribute resources, anybody can contribute labor. And the way that they then organize it is in a very democratic way to determine, how everyone is going to get paid. And the idea behind it is that everyone gets paid in a fair way that that kind of reflects the work or the resources that they put into it. Why this is interesting is that it's not capitalist in the sense that you have a boss who's trying to exploit workers and scrape off the surplus labor for profit. It's basically just people getting together and then sharing the revenues that they make. So it's really much more of a cooperative, I guess, in that sense, a type of worker cooperative, but it's a very sophisticated way of organizing it. And they are looking at blockchain to organize all of this. And I think blockchain, that's exactly where that kind of technology can come into play to actually facilitate this type of non-capitalist cooperative type of production. Another interesting case is that of holochain. Holochain, I guess they say that they're not really blockchain, but it's very similar to blockchain. It's a little bit based on more trust, I guess. It's not completely trustless, but they are trying to create this code that will enable decentralized users across the world to provide the space for an alternative to the current internet. And so they want to create a non-capital internet that's basically available and that everyone has a say in, and that would not be controlled in the form of those server farms that are controlled by Google and Amazon, would be controlled basically by everyone who's contributing to the storage of all the information. And that's another just really interesting application. Lastly, I would just mention Circles is a cryptocurrency, still very, very early stage. And I think these ideas of these cryptocurrencies, they're still all very early. And I think it's going to take a while for them to really have an impact. But they allow you to see what a future could look like. And so they're creating a cryptocurrency which they intend to be used as a means of exchange, that you can use it to buy things. And so obviously it would require a massive buy-in of various providers of goods and services to accept these. But the idea is that they would create them, these circle currencies, they would create them and distribute them to all participants as a form of a guaranteed income. So basically not waiting for the state to do it, but basically doing it on their own terms. And so that's also just a really interesting application of blockchain.
Yeah, those are a couple of those I've looked into before, and I've also find them projects that would be interesting for people to keep up with, just to see how it progresses. I mean, it's still very early, and it's going to be just interesting how they develop. But so in your article, Blockchains Building Blocks of a Post-Capitalist Future, you mention revaluing and de-fetishizing. So I thought they were pretty interesting ideas, and how we would think about creating an intentionally more progressive, probably socialist cryptocurrency or blockchain project. But how would you explain what revaluing and de-fetishizing is, particularly in the context of blockchain and blockchain technology?
So I think that value is what it's really all about. If you want to boil down the struggle for a better future or for a non-capitalist future, it's all about value. Capitalism knows only one value, and that is the exchange value on the market. So the worth of anything is reduced to its price. And this is what Marx had called commodity fetishism. So all the world is essentially reduced to commodities and their price. There's no concern for any other value. Capitalists will then say, that the market, it doesn't have any values, right? So it's kind of, it doesn't take an ethical stand. But that's
neutral.
That's a lie, right? That is one of the biggest lies of capitalism. So, price is ultimately the result of a system of supply and demand. which is fueled by the pursuit of profit. And there are all kinds of ethical consequences to that kind of arrangement. When everything is a commodity, we end up with alienated labor and alienation towards nature, and then the externalization of everything that cannot be viewed as a commodity. And so ecosystems and human well-being, they all basically get trashed because they don't have a price tag and they're free for the taking. And so I think that, that's the problem of value, and any type of efforts to overcome, that aspect of capitalism, which is its heart, is going to have to rethink and come up with alternative value.
How would you see de-fetishizing happening? Like, what would de-fetishizing look like?
Well, I mean, it's not easy. In a sense, what Marx said about the commodity fetishization, what his big concern is that we're no longer aware of any other types of value in the commodity. So we don't see, for example, the labor that was involved. He was particularly concerned about the labor that's involved. We just see the commodity and its price, and the labor is erased from it. And similarly, we don't see the price or the cost to the environment that was involved in this. And so to be able to try to bring that back in some ways, I think it would require, on one hand, maybe a greater decentralization of production and making it more local, so that there's more of a connection to the workers and the environment, so that it's not so far away that you can just forget about it. But there are also other ways of trying to do it, because, we're in a globalized world. We're probably never going to, completely deglobalize if we want to maintain the type of standard of living that we have. And so, there are other ways of trying to make the person that uses a good or service, make them more aware, essentially, of what went into it. And so with regard to the environment, for example, you could have a pretty elaborate certification system that tracks the entire supply chain and the various steps involved and the various impacts and the various types of labor used, and where that labor was and what the conditions were, so that so that you could, for example, have a barcode on a product or a good, and you could scan it, and then you could see the entire history of that product. And so that would be one way of, obviously it's not, the complete decentralized where you're going to the shop and buying it directly from the worker. But at least you would have this kind of connection through the this blockchain enabled supply chain that you could just look up and you can actually see how it was all produced. And in some cases, you can even add more detailed information, for example, film footage of the, some of the sites where these things are being produced, or the stories behind the places. And so there's different ways of trying to recreate that connection between the person that is consuming a good and service and the ones that are actually offering it.
So I think it's a pretty big push at the moment with certain supply chain companies of, like, particularly in the use of blockchain, of, we can show you our traceability. But I think the way that they're thinking about traceability is a bit different than, I think, the way that, maybe you or I are thinking about traceability, but for the explicit intent of de-fetishization. But I do think it is interesting that giant companies are sort of trying to, or at least pretend to try to do de-fetishization to a very limited extent with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get it in some of those older forms, like fair trade coffee and things like that, where you have certain types of guarantees of how things are being produced. And sometimes even with that fair trade coffee, or these cooperative types of coffee exchanges, there would actually be quite a bit of information of where the product is coming from. So there's that attempt of de-fetishizing a little bit and being aware of the work and the labor and the conditions under which this production is happening. But as he said, I think that blockchain is really being developed quickly by companies because they see the value of all these other efficiencies that they can gain by having better chains, obviously.
Yeah.
It would then, but then it's up to the, whoever's using the blockchain. You can code it in a way so that you're actually doing it in a way where you're trying to capture certain types of information, that you then put a value on, or that you have a demand for, that then gets coded into the supply chain. So, that's, again, blockchain is just a tool. It's not going to create a better future, and it's not going to create a libertarian capitalist dream. It's all dependent on what the people do with it.
Hey everyone, Happy New Year's. If you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist community on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you want to be sure that more content like this can be created, you can donate to my efforts through Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist, you can donate starting at $3 per month or more to help me out and join the more than 17 other patrons. At the moment, I've spent more on this project than I've ever earned from it due to hosting costs, so any amount really helps. As a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode and access to monthly Patreon exclusive Q&A episodes, where you can submit questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. On the latest episode of the Patreon exclusive Q&A series, I gave my thoughts on the question about markets versus planning under socialism using blockchain. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. If that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. You mentioned in your article as well about how the impact of technologies like blockchain will depend on how it is designed and employed. So do you have any advice for people who are wishing to create applications on blockchain and want to avoid co-optation by capital?
So that really the key challenge, I guess, for activists that are working within the commons in general, finding ways of establishing the commons in a way where they don't constantly get co-opted. And so, if the commons do constantly get co-opted, then it can never become the foundation for an alternative. And so that is the ultimate question, is how do you prevent that type of co-optation and that ability to somehow barriers or boundaries between the commons and capital, and capital's interest just being, what of value can they kind of pilfer to enhance their profits. So I guess there are a couple of ideas that I would suggest and that I'm exploring also a bit more in the book that I'm working on. For one, I think that any type of commons production, but this applies to code like blockchain or applications of this code, that it can be placed under a pure property type of licensing. So it really depends on how, who does it belong to? And a lot of times in capital, it's under copyright, which means that, it's highly protected and it's made artificially scarce, right? So all of this digital value, theoretically, it could be produced ad infinitum, right? Because it's, it doesn't cost anything to just reproduce it because it's all digital. The thing is with the commons that they have this, because it's a commons, there's no barriers to it, and capital can just take whatever they want. And so there is a development now of, well, we already have the beginnings of it in these pure property licenses, like the software general public license and the Creative Commons licensing. So these were the beginnings of licensing, where you're trying to foster the commons or protect the workers a little bit more. But there is, even now a movement towards more commons, I guess, defensive type of licensing, where you basically say, this is available to a particular in-group, and the in-group would be, a commons-friendly category, right? So it could be, this will be available to anybody who uses it for nonprofit purposes, or anybody who's actively contributing to the commons in some way, or anybody, so there'd be some kind of a limitation to who has access to it. And if you're not that, if you're a capitalist entity that is seeking profit, then you have to pay royalties. You have to pay. You don't just have free access to it. And so it's a way of protecting the commons, and in turn allows the commons to get a critical source of revenue from capital, which it could then in turn use to further expand the commons. So that's one, I think, area that is just beginning, but that really has a lot of potential, and I think would be absolutely necessary to try to protect the commons and expand the commons in the long term. I think that a lot of these blockchain-enabled creations also just need to be very aware of capital's intent and ability to co-opt. So they have to be very explicit about excluding capital. And so, for example, with the holochain and the effort to create this new internet, it would, there would have to be rules that basically, capital is not allowed in. And that would just, and because that's the intent of it. And so you just have to establish these rules of excluding capital. And then ultimately, I think also you would have to have governance arrangements for the various projects you have. If it's a cryptocurrency, for example, or like a holochain based internet, the governance of these things has to be as democratic and as decentralized as possible, so that makes it very hard for capital to somehow come in and buy it out or something, right? If you just have one person you need to convince to kind of sell out and make money, then it's much more likely to happen. But if it's really owned by the people, like a kind of a member cooperative or a worker cooperative, that gets much more difficult to do. So I think those are all different ideas that could help against the co-optation of capital. Oh, and with cryptocurrencies, you can design them in ways that makes them inherently uninteresting to capital. By, for example, what Circles does is they have a demurrage type of arrangement so that the value of the currency decreases quickly with time. So there's absolutely no incentive to try to hoard this. It can't be a store of value. It's really just there as a medium of exchange. And so that's not that interesting to capital because it just loses its value so quickly.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen like the posts on the internet about Circles. It's pretty funny. A lot of people, commenting on their posts like, what is the purpose of this cryptocurrency? Like I can't get rich off of it. So I mean, it's if you want to exclude capital, you can't be interesting to these type of speculators as well, I think.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the people you want to avoid. But of course, I mean, the cryptocurrencies are dominated by capitalistically minded people, and especially people that like to make a quick buck and are interested in speculation. And so, all of that is basically, in my view, is pretty useless for what we're trying to create as a commons-based kind of post-capitalist type of future. So they're doing their thing, but the left, if you want to call it that, they're going to have to come up with alternatives that are just totally different.
It's either, I think, be uninteresting or bully them out of it.
Right.
Okay, so speaking about the left, generally, I think in my experience and with other people's experience, sometimes it's a bit difficult to talk about blockchain as a tool for potential, post-capitalist type of thinking. But I'm just Curious, what's been your experience when talking about blockchain in maybe some of your left-leaning circles, and how do you approach talking to them?
I suppose that my left-leaning circles are primarily academic, um, but there's a lot of overlap, I guess, between the academic side and the more practical side. I would agree that there is a lot of skepticism. Um, I think that the skepticism is it's a broader based skepticism than just a blockchain. I think it's basically a skepticism towards what they perceive as being a form of techno-utopianism. This idea that this new emerging technology is going to come and it's going to change everything, and capitalism won't be able to adapt, and it'll just wipe capitalism off the map, and they just and I think rightfully so, just think that that's just wishful thinking. Of course, when it comes to blockchain in particular, they'll point to Bitcoin and its libertarian kind of roots, and the fact that it's very capitalistic in its applications and its invention, and so they would point to that and say and the banks that they're starting to get on the bandwagon. And I read something on your webpage as well with regards to the large corporations that are looking to create their own cryptocurrencies. Facebook, and I've heard that some of the other big ones. I mean, you could think of Amazon wanting to do something like that. It's a pretty frightening specter. And so the skeptics, they'll point to all of this and they'll say, look, this is capitalism is having a heyday with this, and they're going to just get more powerful. And so I think what needs to be kind of done in a conversation like that is to kind of push back a little bit and say, okay, we're not talking techno-utopianism, but at the same time, you can't be a technology determinist in the opposite direction and say that this technology is all somehow already coded in capital's favor. Or that it has capital's interests already kind of encoded in it. So, technology is a very fluid thing, and it can go many different directions. I guess what really lies also at the heart of this is just the inability right now, I think, of the left to be very visionary, to have a vision of what a non-capitalist world can look like. It's that's been referred to as this capitalist determinacy, or this idea that there is no alternative to capitalism. I feel like the left has kind of gotten sucked into that, and they just can't really imagine anything being powerful enough to resist capital. They've kind of submitted to the power of capital, and it's unfortunate, because when you lose that vision, then you also really kind of lose your political motivation and inspiration. And so I think that's something that needs to be rekindled, is finding that vision again.
Yeah, I think that's Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, probably one of my favorite books. I mean, it's very eye-opening about the sort of cultural and potentially mental effects of what neoliberalism has sort of done with limiting our imagination and our ability to envision alternatives to wage slavery, essentially.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's. I start actually with Fisher in the introduction to the book that I'm working on, because I feel like he really hits the nail on the head with that insight that without that vision, without that ability to see a different type of future, we're just kind of just lame ducks just sitting here,
Yeah. I mean, it's very informative and very good.
I think that it is important to be able to show the left or people that are critical towards capitalism, at least, of the many types of opportunities that these technologies open up, right? And that they're not hardwired to be just tools for capital, and they're obviously not hardwired to bring down capital, right? I mean, that's where agency comes in. We have to harness it, but it's important for the people that are critical towards capitalism to recognize what an important tool it is, and how they really need to take it seriously and work with it if they want to create some kind of an alternative in the future. Maybe perhaps more important though than convincing the political left is convincing the various techies and the nerds and the hackers that are oftentimes doing the work in this technology, and to actually convince them to be a little bit more critical with regard to capital and capitalism, because I think that if you could get them on board, that would really push this technology in the directions that it needs to go. That would then in turn also be able to convince the political left more broadly that there is actually a lot of potential here. And so those kind of two things have to come together.
Found that, I mean, quite a lot of developers in the blockchain space, I mean, I think in particularly maybe more Ethereum, a lot of them were driven by their distaste for big tech companies and and people who were interested in cryptocurrencies as well were already quite disillusioned with finance as it exists today. So I mean, they have a lot of, I think, seeds and potential for I guess radicalization towards the left that can be tapped into and can be explored so that they can be more open to the broader ideas of the left economically and politically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you're tapped in more into that culture, into those people than I am, but I have a sense that it's there. I mean, a lot of times I feel that there's an underlying bucking against capital and a bucking against the state. But I feel like if you want, taking it to the next level, there's oftentimes a resistance. I mean, I don't think they need to really embrace, leftist ideology even, but just to be a little bit more aware of the political implications and the possibilities of really, of creating a different future. So I guess what I would say in the end here is that that we find ourselves increasingly in an economy that is really dominated by knowledge and data and information. I mean, that is the key to prosperity these days, and it's just becoming more so. And so with this being captured digitally, these assets could theoretically be set free for the benefit of everyone. But capitalism really prevents that from happening. And I think that's the key insight here, is that there's this potential for so much prosperity, and it's being held back. It's being held scarce by capital. And so I think a key aim would have to be to free up the immense potential of the digital commons, but also, and that goes hand in hand with that, is a careful management of the material commons, because those are scarce. And those have to be managed in a way that's just and sustainable. But today more than ever, I think we have the technological ability to create a really good life for everyone on the planet. And so blockchain can be a critical tool in kind of pushing us in that direction, or facilitating. Let's not say pushing; it's facilitating us to go in that direction. It's a key tool. But of course, it'll be dependent on people to actually harness that tool for those ends. And so, in the end, it comes back to us.
I think Marx wrote that technology it has contradictory potential. Right? It has a potential to liberate people, but it also has the potential to make us be even more enslaved to our work. And so I think it's up to us to sort of compete in that struggle for the use of the technological commons, I guess, and take that for particular political goals.
Right. I agree.
But so thanks a lot for taking the time. when can people expect your new book, and how should they keep up with your work?
Well, writing books is one of those things, done when it's done. But no, I'm currently shopping around for a publisher. I have probably about a third of the book written now. I have a very clear idea of what's going to happen in all of the other chapters. So I am thinking that I'll probably be wrapping it up by the end of the summer of next year. Then it depends on the publisher, where it fits into their release schedule. So, who knows? Hopefully it will come out, I would say early, 2022 or something like that. So yeah, there's still some work to do, and then the publisher has to do all of the marketing stuff and all of that stuff. Hopefully we'll be able to find a way to make it open access in some way or another. It's really in the spirit of what I'm writing about to make it that, but it's actually much harder to do than one would think, maybe. So yeah, it's a work in progress. I have been a bit lazy in regards to keeping people up to speed with what I'm doing. I guess I've just been so involved in the work, but I think once the publisher is sorted, then I'll start using my Facebook page to kind of regularly update on the progress and on the various ideas I'm exploring in the chapters.
All right, cool. And I imagine there'll be quite a bit of a blockchain in that book.
There is, yeah. There's blockchain is explored for sure in various chapters and in various types of applications. The supply chains and the cryptocurrencies, and there's lots of different types of applications that come up. But it's not the only emerging technology. I'm also looking at artificial intelligence, which obviously synergizes quite well with all that information that can be processed, and then the internet. The Internet of Things, and ultimately also the digital manufacturing, 3D printing stuff.
Nice. That sounds very cool. And I will definitely be picking it up when it comes out.
Yeah, well, I have to convince the publishers of that there's more people like you out there.
Well, thanks a lot, Hannes, and good luck on the book.
Thank you so much for having me.